Hello, my name is Elliot Gu. I'm the editor of Personal Finance as well as the Energy Strategist. I want to talk a little bit about some recent news that is having a pretty wide-ranging impacts on the markets, and that's really of a political nature. Earlier this week, we learned that the Massachusetts Senate seat formerly held by Ted Kennedy is now passing to the Republican Party. Obviously, a big surprise on a number of different levels. One of the first casualties of that, of course, is likely to be the healthcare legislation that looked likely to be passed this year, early this year. And it looks like that's going to be generally a positive for most of your healthcare stocks. In personal finance, we've been talking pretty much all of last year about the idea that we felt that legislation to come out of Congress was likely to be less onerous than the market initially thought. If you remember, about a year ago in February of 2009, a lot of healthcare stocks sold off very sharply after the president announced his preliminary budget. We felt that the public option and a number of the other clauses in that legislation that a lot of people and healthcare-related companies feared wouldn't make it into the final bill. Now it looks like it may not get passed at all, and if it does, it'll probably get passed piecemeal and be even weaker in terms of a market impact than initially thought. The biggest beneficiaries of this would be, of course, your pharmaceutical companies and your health management type companies, your insurance companies. The biggest losers probably on the healthcare front would be your hospitals. A lot of those had rallied at the end of last year and early this year and been pretty heavily recommended on the idea that with more people insured, they would have lower bad debt expenses. In other words, when people come into the hospital, they must be treated up to a certain point. And if they don't have insurance, the hospital's probably not going to get paid for that. And so that's been a major problem for hospitals in recent years. And so some of the hospital stocks probably going to get hit a little bit from this. But broadly for the healthcare sector, it is a positive. The other sector, which I think is getting less attention right now, but will get more attention as we move through the year, is really energy. At one point, a lot of people had felt that the president would try to pass some sort of carbon dioxide cap and trade system in 2009. Early in the year, up through about mid-year, you heard a lot of talk about alternative energies being a big winner of an Obama presidency. Again, we took a little bit of a contrarian view on this in personal finance and in the Energy Strategist, where we thought that actually a lot of that was overhyped, that a lot of the stimulus money that was earmarked for alternative energy was actually a relatively small amount, and that it would be harder than expected to pass a carbon cap and trade system in 2009, and very, very difficult this year with the looming midterm elections. With the change in the Senate as a result of the Massachusetts win, that's even less likely to happen this year. For all intents and purposes, I think carbon cap and trade this year is totally a dead issue. Now, what does that mean for energy companies? Well, I think what's likely to happen is that Congress will try to pass some sort of energy legislation this year. It probably will not have a carbon cap and trade type component, but it's likely to be something more along the lines of having a lot of carrots in the sense of subsidies for various industries and policies of that nature. In other words, a lot of the bullish aspects for the industry without a lot of the potential downfalls of a carbon cap and trade system, which would be kind of expensive for a lot of energy-related firms. Specifically, I think the two big beneficiaries of this change as far as the energy markets are concerned are natural gas and nuclear power. Focusing first on natural gas, both in the short and long term. One of the things about the carbon cap and trade legislation is that a lot of the focus to date on that have been, as I mentioned, renewable energy. The reality, though, is that ramping up renewable energy is a lot more difficult than the public popularly believes. Even the most sort of aggressive long-term forecasts by the International Energy Agency and the Energy Information Administration says that by 2035 or even 2050, probably the U.S. and most of the developed world countries will still get something like 3/4 of their energy from fossil fuels. So while wind and solar will grow, there are a couple of problems with those technologies. One, they're much more expensive than fossil fuels right now. Two, and I think probably a bigger concern, is integrating those technologies with the grid. The problem being, of course, that the wind doesn't blow at a constant pace at all the time. Therefore, power output from a wind plant is intermittent. In order to integrate it in levels above about 10%, you have to totally remake your grid. That's very difficult and very expensive. And as anybody who's ever studied economic and financial history knows, oftentimes the simplest and cheapest solution wins out over the sort of high-tech, sort of gee-whiz type of technology that's out there. And I think that's what we're seeing right now with natural gas. Natural gas has lower emissions than any of the other fossil fuels, has about 60% less emissions of carbon dioxide, almost no emissions of sulfur dioxide, and things like mercury that are problems with coal. At the same time, it's very quick and very cheap to build a new natural gas-fired power plant. The other benefit of natural gas, of course, is that we have a lot of it. Thanks to a lot of the unconventional shale finds here in the U.S., we probably have well over a century's worth of natural gas out there to use, even if we do ramp up our use of natural gas significantly in coming years. So it's a very vast resource. The other thing we have internationally is a lot of liquefied natural gas out there, places like Qatar, places like Australia, ramping up their LNG export capacity. That's a lot of gas that's out there in the international market to satisfy increased demand abroad as well. So I think natural gas is going to be one of those things that is going to receive a lot more attention. There's already a Natural Gas Act, or a so-called Natural Gas Act, sort of making its way through Congress. What it would do is provide incentives for doing things like using natural gas as a transportation fuel. There's a growing sense in Washington that act, or some version of that act, will pass. That may be something that passes instead of a carbon cap and trade. In other words, it gives environmentalists something in the sense that it does reduce carbon dioxide emissions, but it can also garner a great deal of Republican support and probably pretty easily make its way through the Senate. The other one, which I'll talk about a little bit more briefly, is nuclear power. Nuclear power, really the only large-scale technology we have that emits absolutely no carbon dioxide and no other pollutants of any kind. There has been some question about the storage issue. Really much, much less of a problem than it's made out to be. And Harry Reid's seat in the Senate also looks to be in potential jeopardy as we move later on in the year. So that actually, storing some of that waste in Nevada actually might become more of a reality than a lot of people suppose. Internationally, the waste issue is just not a problem. China is proceeding very, very aggressively with developing nuclear technology. It's going to make a lot bigger impact on their use of energy than alternatives, really, going out to 2020. Europe is also turning the corner. For many, many years, a lot of European countries, Germany and Italy in particular, had sort of a moratorium or plans to actually close down existing plants. That's totally changed. That's totally been thrown out the window. It's becoming increasingly apparent, even in Copenhagen late last year, that none of these countries can meet their carbon dioxide reduction goals without maintaining or, in fact, increasing their exposure to nuclear power. So the big news this week, in summation, was obviously the change in the Senate. That changed the character of a lot of debates for a lot of different industries in the United States. Two of the biggest, of course, healthcare. And I think what's less recognized, but possibly even more important, is energy. I think this is going to be the big year for natural gas, and I think it's going to be a big year for nuclear power. Thank you very much.